So welcome to the Mixed Musings class, Know Your Supplies. This is lesson 1, and we're going to cover the different classes of acrylic paint. So my name is Terry, and welcome to class. What is the difference between craft acrylic paints like these? These are just store brand craft acrylic paints, but like also that would be the other ones that are sold in the same section, like the folk arts and the ones like those. And the more expensive artist grade paints, these are the ones you find over in the fine art section. Really it comes down to the quality of the materials the paints are made from. A good analogy is going to be like fast food. A meal off the fast food dollar menu might satisfy your hunger and be easy on your wallet, but you know it's made from lower quality ingredients and that eating it is not good for your health. You also know that the occasional dollar store menu meal won't cause you any harm as long as you eat healthy most of the time. So there are even times, like when time or patience or money is running short, that the dollar menu becomes your best friend. Craft grade acrylic paints, I'm going to move these out of the way so we can focus on the craft ones for the next few minutes. Craft grade acrylic paints are like the dollar menu items. They're made from lower quality materials than what you find in the artist grade paints, or even lower quality materials than what you find in the studio or student grade artist paints. What you get when you purchase craft acrylics is a bottle of various materials, chemicals, dyes, etc. that blend together to make the desired color, suspended in a base that contains some acrylic polymer mixed with other materials and chemicals to create the desired consistency. Let me put a little bit down on here. Well, we'll get to that in just a minute. So how is that different than the artist grade paints? Well, the artist grade, and I have a tube of golden zinc white here and some store brand Dick Blick, lots of these. The artist grade, you see it says artist right there. Well, the artist grade paint is like a healthy homemade meal. You know that quality ingredients were used and exactly which ingredients were used. You know that your plate of organic squash with salt and butter contains only those 3 items. Similarly, artist grade paints contain the listed pigment or pigments in a pure acrylic polymer base. So right here on this tube, let's see, get it closer, see if I can get it closer to the camera. See if that'll, oops, it's over here. Okay, right here. This is artist grade Dick Blick artist grade acrylic, series 4, light cerulean blue. You can see here that the pigment is oxides of cobalt and chromium, PB, which stands for pigment blue 36. You can look that up. It's a standardized pigment. These other numbers help you know where it fits in to a specific color scale. And then here the vehicle, that would be the solution that it's in, is a pure acrylic polymer emulsion. So these pigments, like they're listed there, are pretty standard across different brands. They really have not changed much over time either. Cadmium red is made from cadmium. This is cadmium yellow. Naphthalene crimson is made from naphthalene carbamide. You can see cadmium sulfide there. The 20th century saw the introduction of many synthetic pigments and the acrylic polymer, because that's really a 20th century invention. Acrylic paint entirely, but those have become an accepted part of the professional palette too. Okay, the studio or student grade fine art paints fall somewhere in between the dollar menu craft paints and the healthy meal of the artist grade paints. Think of them like comfort food. They're good to use when working on something for yourself or learning, but not what you would necessarily serve to company. So now that I have overdone the food analogies, let's get down to some specifics and put some samples down on a piece of paper on what each type of acrylic paint is good for. So craft paint, like the name implies, is good to use when working on crafts, like painting wood, painting boxes. Because the colors are not made from standardized pigments like the artist grade paints, the blending properties of the craft paints are not always consistent or predictable. Likewise, their color fastness, or how long they can expose to light before fading, is also an unknown factor. So craft paints can work well in some places though. They have usually, unless it's labeled glossy, they usually have a more matte finish than the fine art paints. And that often works well in art journals because being inside of a book, there's no worry about light exposure, and the usually very matte surface helps to prevent the pages from sticking together. So I'm going to put a little down right there. Do some colors. Some basic primary colors here, so you can kind of see the difference as I put down the different ones. I won't be able to really feel how they change, but okay. Some red craft paint. This is Fire Engine Red. And this one is Blue Velvet. They were the closest I could find to the studio and artist grade ones that I'm going to show you. And this one is Lemon Yellow. Okay, craft paints also work well in some popular mixed media techniques where the paint is mixed with watercolor crayons or watercolor pencils or chalk pastels. The higher acrylic polymer levels and the slightly glossy finish that the higher grade artist paints have often kind of works poorly with those mixed media methods. And for those, I find that craft paints are really the better choice. Craft paints usually only come in liquids like this in bottles. They rarely come in thicker tubes. So you almost always find them like this in these thinner bottles. So the studio, move on to the studio or student grade paints, right here. Different manufacturers also going to have different names for this grade of paint. Student, studio, basics, level 1. The names all essentially mean the same thing. The paint is meant as a reasonably priced learning aid. They have a heavier body, like the higher grade acrylic paints do. Although sometimes it can be a little lighter. Let's do red. This is Naphthol Red Deep. If you look on here, the numbers, if you look on the manufacturer's website, you can usually find a key as to what all the little symbols and numbers mean and relate it to their light fastness and the pigments that were used. This will also list the pigments right here on the back that were used. PRs, pigment red 112 and pigment red 23. So the pigments in the student or studio grade are usually a mix of named pigments, and sometimes there's other materials in them, which allows them to have a much lower price than the higher grade paints. Good quality student grade paints will mix fairly consistency and usually will have a clearly labeled color fastness rating, like I showed you on here, which makes them a great option for artwork that you want to hang on the walls or otherwise be out for display. If your art is mainly being made for yourself or you're wanting to practice a lot, studio grade paints are a great option in both price and performance. And if you look, you'll see that the price can be pretty dramatically different between these and the artist grade paints. My colors here that I put down a phthalo blue and a primary yellow. The one caveat that I want to give you about these is that not all student grade paints or studio grade paints are created the same. It's really a good idea to stick to name brands or reputable store brands. These Van Goghs are okay. Liquitex basics are great. Golden makes a great line. And even the Dick Blick store brands are good. But try them out first before you dedicate a whole package. Now, I don't know how much you can see on the camera, but this is really a thicker, richer paint experience there when you put it down. But it's also shiny. Not real shiny, but just a little bit. See that? My water's getting nasty. And you can really see with the yellow, I think it shows up in the camera, how much more vibrant. And these are really pretty close to the same color when they're next to each other. But just how much more vibrant that studio grade paint is than the craft paint. All right, so let's look at our artist or professional grade acrylics now. For the last decade or so, these have come in both the thicker, heavier body tubes and in these liquids. Both Liquitex and Golden make an excellent artist grade liquid acrylic. So they come in both the liquid and the thicker. You can also find the heavier body in jars sometimes, which is neat if you need like a lot, or if you go through a ton of white and get a jar, or if you just like to paint giant canvases. The liquid varieties, these are actually higher in pigment than the heavier body paints. The thicker paint, these, means more acrylic polymer has been added. So the liquids, which are thinner, actually have less acrylic polymer and a higher ratio of pigment. That also makes them more expensive because it's the pigment that causes the price on these. So some brands list other information on the back or the front on there. Let's see, so gold, let me flatten it out a little bit. You see this one lists a transparency, matte, thin, how thin or thick it is, and its tinting ability, and that's related a lot, not just the polymer, but the pigments in it affect those things. You see the pigments in this one is pigment white 4, zinc oxide, and there's more information on it, recommended temperatures. Also, if you go to the manufacturer's website for any of the artist grade ones, you can also get a ton more information. And if you're shopping in a fine art store, there's often a pamphlet you can get that'll tell you even more about the chemical properties of the paint that you're getting. So you really know what you have there. Sometimes you'll see other numbers on them, and we're not going to discuss them in this class, but if you take my color theory class, we'll discuss them a little bit more about Munsell numbers and other numbers that help you relate, like over here, your pigments into some of the different color systems. So there, and also these right on the front, Goldens and the Dicks, most of the artist ones will list their light fastness levels right on the tubes or the bottles, and you can look those up in the literature, the pamphlets, or in the manufacturer's website to find out exactly what those mean. And then sometimes there's series numbers. The series numbers usually are a price key. The higher the series number, the more expensive the pigment is in it, and therefore the more expensive the paint is. So it can help you if you're looking and you really, really want that cadmium yellow medium, but it's a series 3 and that's out of your price range. You can look at a series 2 or a series 1 yellow that might fit your palette. So occasionally, and I do not have any, I looked through there to show you, but sometimes you will find the color listed in Hooker's Green when you go by it. This is the Hooker's Green, the regular one, but sometimes you'll find like a Hooker's Green hue. This means that they're a blend of pigments made to look and perform just like the named pigment, but because it's a hue, it's a blend that's less expensive. And sometimes that's good if there's just a really expensive one, like it's a Series 4 Cerulean Blues, not a cheap paint. And sometimes some of the pigments become rare. Some of these are mined minerals and they're limited resources, so sometimes that makes them more expensive or just hard to get, and the hue paints are an alternative if you really need that color pigment and you can't find or can't afford the pure one. So let's take a look real quick at these. I do the tube ones first. Now this is, I should have picked up the same one. This is Cerulean Blue. And cadmium yellow. So they're actually slightly different class of blue and yellow here. But this is the same red that I used for those, which is Naphtha Crimson. Okay. Now you can see, I don't know, yeah, I think it shows up on the camera. And here in person you can see that even though they're the exact same, you can still see a lot richer pigment color in the artist grade and a different feel to the paint. And the blue. And the yellow. You can really see how vibrant that one is, but it's a slightly, cadmium's a more vibrant color. And the liquids. This is Pyro Red. It's close to the naphthalene. Hansa, let's see, Ultramarine Blue. And Hansa Yellow Medium. And see how nice and that's liquid, so when I'm pulling that down, I'm getting a really crisp line like you would expect from a liquid and a really vibrant color. And I'll scan this sheet or photograph it and include it with the class materials. And yellow, which next to those other ones, that looked bright when the cadmium yellow from that one looked bright when I put it down, but when I put that one down, wow, super bright. Okay. All three grades of acrylic paint have a good time and place for their use. The ultimate option would be to have all three in your most used colors always available. But if that's not possible, then I recommend investing in the craft paints you use for journals and craft projects, along with a basic palette of the student grade acrylics for practicing fine art projects. For work you want to sell, it really depends on the piece itself. If it's a traditional type of painting, a very traditional kind of fine art piece of painting, then artist grade materials should really be used to guarantee the buyer gets the quality, long-lasting materials and color fastness for their investment. For mixed media pieces, buyers expect the materials to be a bit more varied and at times kind of wild. I know that when I do a mixed media piece, things can get pretty crazy and wild. I used to use tons of plaster of Paris on them. So mixed media pieces, a little wild, and use whatever works for you in a mixed media piece. Don't really feel limited by anything. If craft paints or whatever are what works for you, the right textures, use it. Just when you if you offer it for sale, offer full disclosure to your buyers so they know exactly what they're getting. That's it for the lesson 1. And next month we're going to cover more about substrates and different ways to use acrylic paints. And then lesson 3 in 2 months will be on acrylic mediums. And then we'll move on to something else. So thank you for joining me.